Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public or press who have joined us today, either in person or watching via the live stream, to this meeting of the Communities, Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee at Newshire Hall in Alconbury Weald. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures, tweet or blog, or X as it's called now, during the meeting. But could I please request that members of the committee and the public turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There's no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. So item 1 is apologies for absence and declarations of interest.
Thank you, Chair. There are no apologies this time.
Thank you. And Adela.
Yeah, I need to declare an interest because I'm chair of the Ramsey Community Centre Trust, and it's an item on the agenda, so I will be leaving the room.
So that's agenda item 5, isn't it? The CAM's priorities, yeah. So when we did the scoring, members declared an interest there, so I don't think that they need to do so today, other than obviously Adela, because she's a trustee of the organisation. I know we declare an interest if it's in our division, for example, but that's fine. Thank you. Adela, anybody else at all? No. Claire, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Can I just be clear about the declarations of interest in relation to the Cambridge Priorities Capital Fund? Are we, when that comes up later, do you want the declarations of interest there in relation to anything that concerns our divisions, or are we doing it in general?
Thank you, Chair. No, you're not required to make a declaration for a project if it's just in your area. It's if you're involved with the organisation that you need to make a declaration.
Thank you. Item 2 is the minutes of our meeting held on the 11th of January. We've been asked to approve those as a true and correct record. Can I ask if any member disagrees with the accuracy of those minutes? No, so I see no objections, so I'll sign those. Question 3, we have this public questions and petitions. We have received a public question relating to agenda item 5, which will be taken at the beginning of that item, and we've received no petitions for this meeting. So moving on to item 4, Anti-Poverty Commission contracts and budget allocation 2024-25. The first report is a key decision on the Anti-Poverty Commission contracts and budget allocation, and this is going to be presented by the Service Director of Communities, Libraries and Skills, Lisa Riddle.
Thank you, Chair. Just to know, Nikita's apologies, who was the author of this paper, and she's on annual leave today. So the anti-poverty paper sets out a request to committee to approve funding to provide £150,000 to our local assistance scheme. This is on top of the current grant that they receive on an annual basis, and that's for a period of 1 year for the financial year 24-25. And it's also for committee to note the £400,000 grant that has been made to the Citizens Advice Bureau, and that's for income maximisation work. In summary, the local assistance scheme provides assistance to people in the county who are in crisis or hardship. It identifies and reaches out to them, and in the first half of the financial year 23-24, the scheme provided support to 448 households, with 75% of those households receiving white goods via the scheme. This additional funding reflects the cost of living pressures, and the Citizens Advice contract for income maximisation provides support to people in financial hardship. It reviews their entitlements and provides wider advice and support around financial planning and things like that. I just wanted to draw your attention as well to section 2.3 to say that the Household Support Fund itself is referenced in this paper. However, we were notified in the Chancellor's speech on the 6th of March of the extension of funding for 6 months, but because it covers more than one committee and is a change to the budget, that will be considered at Strategy and Resources and Performance Committee next week and is referenced in the paper there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions? Philippa.
Thank you. I don't think it was in the report, but and this isn't in any way a sinister or suggestive question. But could I be assured that the district council officers and the local who know how well this particular organisation does deliver have been part of the process of choosing? Because obviously there are other players, and I think they're working together anyway. But as we've just picked on this particular person to deliver it, can I be assured that there's been full consultation with the district council? Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa Slatter. Yes, it's something that's actually a current contract. So it went through full procurement, get my words out, a couple of years ago. So historically, the contract actually sat with commissioning, and it moved over to our directorate last year. So it went through the full process with bids being scored following procurement legislation, sorry. But since then, the top up has also been raised by some of our district colleagues. So, for example, City Council particularly asked us to consider topping up, and this is something that we've done through Household Support Fund in the past as well. So it's really recognising the pressure on that budget and the organisation.
Because
Thank
the
you.
cooperation of things like white goods, they know where to go for white goods, etc. I think they are working very well together. I just like to have it in writing that that's a crucial part of any district. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and then Alex.
Thank you. As mention of the network of champions, could I just understand a little bit more about the champions? These are they volunteers, or are they part of the CALAS network setup? And clearly they play a really, really important part in the whole delivery of this service. So just to have a little bit more understanding of
I think, Chair, if it's okay, I'm going to have to take that away as an action to get the detail from Nikita, who works closely with them as their commissioning manager.
Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome this paper, and especially the income maximizing scheme, because I think we all know from our conversations with residents that many people still don't know what benefits they're actually entitled to. So I really welcome especially this part of the work of making sure that everyone is knowledgeable of and can access and have the support to access the benefits that they're already entitled to, in addition of thinking about potentially new schemes of maximizing that. I'm of course very pleased that the government extended the Household Support Fund for another 6 months, but I'm also pleased that as a council we can put this 2.2 million, because this is not something that is a short-term need. As we know from all across our divisions, we have residents struggling with the cost of living, so it's really important to have some continuation of that. I wanted to ask around the, what has been committed as opposed to uncommitted, and how we might think about the funding that's not specifically yet committed to something specific in the paper, and how are we thinking about this in the broader strategy over the next few years. And I also wanted to ask around the links with Cambridgeshire Skills. I think that it's really important. I meet so many people locally in my division that have skills already, or can develop skills that could be turned into a business, or could be self-employed, or could do something at the local level, perhaps in a not-for-profit area, as well as for-profit businesses. And I'm really keen to maybe to hear a bit more about this overlap with Cambridgeshire Skills, and especially around supporting local business as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take the first part of the question. So what we were keen to do with the money that was allocated through the budget towards anti-poverty was to ensure that there was support for residents that continued, and hence the paper that you have in front of us. And obviously, as we say, subsequently we've heard from government about the extension of the Household Support Fund. In terms of the remainder of the budget allocated to the anti-poverty work, what we want to do is work with our partners, including our district council partners, who are fundamental to that work because of their responsibilities with housing and homelessness, to develop a shared strategy and a shared approach to that. And so we will be bringing back further information about the allocation of that funding as a result of further discussions and consultation, both with partners, and also we're keen to look at ways in which we can, in an appropriate way, hear from people who experience poverty and understand the impact on their lives and the lives of their families, so that that can inform how we, with our partners, spend the money that we do have allocated through the budget. So more about the process of that engagement and further information about the allocation of that fund will be coming in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, did you have your hand up there?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question of clarification. The grants that are being made or have been made, are they solely for the income maximisation? And the CAB, for example, is the agency that delivers it, or is it towards also the administration costs of CAB? Not that I think that's necessarily a bad thing, but just for information, is it all for income maximisation, or is it part for its own administration?
So I haven't got the breakdown to hand, but there are members of staff that are employed to deliver the income maximisation work. So the £400,000 grant will cover their salaries and associated costs. But I can take that away and see if we can get a breakdown for you.
It'd be quite interesting to know the mix.
Certainly. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else at all on this paper? Which I think is excellent. It's good news that we have that extension to the Household Support Fund, albeit only for 6 months, but some excellent work here. Much appreciated. So we're being asked, so 2 recommendations here: to approve proposals to provide an additional £150,000 to Cambridge Housing Society for the delivery of the Cambridgeshire Local Assistance Scheme for the period April 24 to March 25. And B, note the decision to issue a grant of £400,000 to the Citizens Advice Bureau to deliver income maximisation across Cambridgeshire for the period April 24 to March 25. I think we're all in agreement with those recommendations. Anybody have any concerns? No? Okay. We're all content. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5, which is Cambridgeshire Priorities Capital Fund, endorsement of recommendations. So this is another key decision. It'll be presented by our Head of Communities, Jill Buckingham. Members will also be aware that an addendum to this report was published on the 19th of March following the presentation of the report. We also have a question from Mr. John McKee after that, who will obviously then will present that. So Jill, over to you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
The purpose of the paper today is to provide committee with the outcome of the member recommendation panel and to conclude the application stage of this fund. There are 2 papers to refer to, the full report and then the addendum. The full report outlines the background and the process and the details of the fund and lists the project scoring over 80. The intention had been to include within that paper projects scoring over 75. However, a historic project in Fenstanton, which was awarded a grant under the previous communities capital scheme, came to light just prior to the publication of the papers for today's meeting. Discussions are now underway with those involved in this historic scheme. As officers, we wanted to be assured that there was sufficient capital budget to support this previous scheme and to support the recommendations for awards under the new priorities scheme. I am pleased to report that this has been clarified and we are able to make the recommendations for the awards today that are set out in the addendum. So we will be looking at both papers together. The full report outlines the process that started with yourselves in May of last year, when you agreed the new process, the new criteria, timescales, scoring criteria, etc., eligibility, and you agreed for there to be a 2-stage process. The first stage was an expression of interest, and at the point of the closure of the expression of interest stage, which we gave organisations 10 weeks, we received 157 applications, first stage applications. So we knew then that we were going to be heavily oversubscribed for the funds available. The benefit of doing it two-stage was first that we could sift out those who wouldn't be eligible, so no organisation, or at least we reduced the risk of any organisation putting in a full application without there being any chance of them being eligible for the funding. It also meant that we then had a finite number. We had an absolute number maximum that would be receiving, that would be making a full application, and we were then able to manage expectations around how many organisations were likely to be in receipt of the funding. And also we were able to offer support to all of those organisations proactively, rather than waiting for an organisation that might be putting in an application we didn't know about contacting us, or not knowing that they could contact us for that support. So it was a helpful process. In November, we went to spokes and agreed that we would the potential for 157 full applications to be scored in areas of which required significant specialist knowledge and expertise around value for money, the different ambitions around climate, etc., required officer input. So we had an officer scoring panel involving officers from across many directorates involved in scoring each of the applications. The collated scores were then presented to the member panel that met in February. In May of last year, the agreement was this threshold for scoring to be successful was 80. We only had 15 applications that met that threshold, and they are the 15 on the full paper, the main paper. The feeling from the member panel was that there were some really worthwhile and high quality applications that didn't meet the 80. And going with just the 80 would have meant that the full fund wasn't spent. And so the proposal today is that we also include the really high quality applications that came in scoring 75 plus, and those are the ones that appear in the extra paper. I don't know whether you want me to list these projects or how you want me to take it further, or if there's any questions at this stage.
Well, I think the projects are in the paper, aren't they? But are there any questions at this stage at all from anyone? Jeff and then Philippa.
Well, they're general questions, not specific about the particular project selected.
Sorry, Chair.
But you wanted to ask. You wanted somebody to ask.
Sorry, Jeff. Sorry,
Yeah,
Jeff.
I know. Yeah,
You're right. I just need to take the public question first before we go on to anything else. Thank you. So I just need to ask John McKee, who's joining us remotely, to present his question to the committee, please.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Good.
Yeah.
So I'm John McKee. I'm the chair of the trustees at Gamlingay Eco Hub. We put in an application last November, well, phase 1 and then phase 2 application last November. As the name suggests, we're very eco, apart from one aspect. We've got solar panels, we've got ground source heat pumps, etc., etc. But the one aspect we don't have is batteries for the battery supply onto the solar panels. And so when the electricity costs have gone up, they've hit us very, very badly. Apart from staff costs, they're in fact our largest cost. So we put in an application, which we believe to be a very, very thorough application. And we find that we weren't successful, which is fair enough. There's only a certain amount of money to go around. But we're very disappointed to find that we can't understand where our application failed to meet the criteria, or how we scored lowly compared to other applications which seem to be for similar facilities. Originally, I was very concerned because it appeared that only 58% of the money was being allocated, which obviously with your addendum now takes it to closer to the 100%, but still £47,000 remaining. And we only asked for a relatively small amount, £15,000, which we feel would be of fantastic value, not only to our community locally. We support over 30 groups from youth clubs to the elderly to community cafes, all sorts of sporting and health facilities and support groups and things. So we're at a bit of a loss as to why we didn't make the criteria. And I've got a trustees meeting coming up where they'll be looking to me to try and explain to them why we didn't get any, why we weren't successful. So I'm somewhat concerned that we're not able to understand where we went wrong, basically.
Thank you, Mr. McGee, for your question. As I say, I completely understand the frustration of organisations that aren't in the ones that are being recommended today. It was really clear by the September deadline that the vast majority of bids wouldn't be funded because it was so oversubscribed, and it's not any reflection on the other bids. They just didn't score as high by the panel. We made every effort to manage expectations, informing all eligible second stage applicants that unlike the previous stage, which was just around eligibility, this stage would be very competitive and that only the highest scoring projects would be recommended for funding. We have been very open about the scoring framework we used, including the target scores in each section of the application form, so applicants knew the level of detail and what we were looking for. All applications were assessed and scored by a panel of officers from across the council, and I think this is the key bit when it comes to getting the detailed feedback, is that it included, and it wasn't just one person, it would be generally it was 2 or 3 at least from these departments that were involved in scoring 93 applications. So that's finance, property services, the climate team, public health, the anti-poverty team, my own team, Care Together. There were many people involved. Lower scoring applications were not rejected, but only the highest scoring applications are being recommended for funding. We have made an offer of support to all of the unsuccessful applicants, that we'd be happy for people in my team in the community service to offer that support. They are there for the support. They weren't the scoring panel, but they could probably give some really good guidance and advice going forward and help secure other funding with you from other potential funders. We are a very small team. We would need to call on colleagues across the council to get that detailed feedback for the 67, 68 organisations involved. And our focus does now need to be on next steps with the organisations on the list for today.
Well, understanding that, I'm sure there must be somewhere a spreadsheet of the scoring or whatever that could be shared so that I could understand and feed back to my trustees the areas where for some reason
just interject slightly. So you've asked your question, which we very much welcome. We'll obviously also go back and consider your feedback. But Jill's obviously answered the question, so we'll move on to the next stage. But obviously appreciate your attendance today, Mr. McKee. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll now turn to the debate, but just before we do that, I'd like to move an amendment to the recommendations based on the information that was provided in the addendum, which was published on Tuesday. I propose that instead of delegating the responsibility to allocate any remaining funds to applications scoring 75 and above to the Executive Director for Strategy and Partnerships, as is currently included in the recommendation, B, we instead agree to reduce the minimum score to 75 for applications to be recommended for funding, and subsequently agree to fund the 11 projects listed in the addendum. Do I have a seconder?
Second, Chair.
Thank you. That is proposed and seconded. So we'll debate the amendment, but also appreciate there'll be questions for Jill from her presentation earlier. So I think, Jeff, you had your hand up first.
Well, it's a general question. It's not about the amendment. Oh, I should continue with the question.
Question, I'm sure that's fine.
Okay. Before I ask my question, I make a general point about feedback. I think other colleagues may well want to make a point in that, but I think that generally it is a good idea to feedback applicants. They put in a lot of effort into their project applications, but I'll leave others pick up that point. I'm going to bring a wry smile to my colleague, Councillor Daunton, because she always says it's wonderful to have an accountant on the team who can ask financial questions. Well, the problem about that, of course, is we are very boring and very mundane, and we're going to ask not difficult questions, but questions that perhaps are not necessarily within the immediate spirit of a particular project or projects. And my question, as I look at this whole process, is I wonder how the assessors were persuaded, or not so persuaded, but satisfied that the cost that had been applied for were correct, that they were properly supported, and that they were adequate. Because when we were talking about this in an earlier committee meeting, we were all concerned that the initial idea of 20,000, a fund of 20,000 would not be adequate. We upped the ante and pushed the grant limit to 40,000. A lot of them are right at the very limit there. So have they taken advantage of that? Are they co-funded with other projects? And what will happen if the funding which they've applied for, the cost estimates which they've used in the funding that they've applied for is not adequate? Will they be able to complete the project? So it's a whole series of questions that really arise around cost. So I'm not hogging them.
Thank you, Jeff. I assume you're referring to accountants, you're referring to yourself, were you?
I am. Yes, I'm
You're an
sort of
accountant. Well, doesn't entirely surprise me, but that's good questions, though. Good questions. Did you want to come back on that, Jill, and then we'll go to Philippa?
Yes, I will do. So all applicants had to provide 3 written quotes for the work that they wanted to fund. The value for money element of the scoring, and there were 20 points out of the possible 100 for value for money, was scored by finance. And within their scoring matrix, so what scores 0, what scores 20, what scores 18, was the amount of match funding. Some would have had none potentially, but they would have not scored then as high in the matrix from finance for the value for money. Some would have been a minor funder, and so that was reflected in the value for money scoring. The other elements within the value for money section was around their viability, and their previous accounts had to be submitted, the most recent accounts, to ensure that there was a buffer. We also recommended and advised and said to include a contingency. So there will be terms and conditions for each of the applicants. We will be talking to them all in detail if they're successful, and that amount of money will be obviously held back and only used if required, but they have built in either within the bid and or from their own funds allowed for an element of contingency funding.
All right, I'll just come back very, very quickly. Value for money and the cost are 2 different things.
Yeah.
Even as an accountant, I know that there's a difference between value and cost. We're said to know not the cost of everything, value of nothing, but I appreciate that here. My essential point, though, is, are we monitoring? Perhaps I should have asked that more directly. You're not going to go down there every month while they're doing these projects, but build costs in particular. We've got a couple of refurbishments of community halls. Time marches on. They've got quotes 6 months ago. Are they still valid? What happens, if they find that the costs have increased? Contingency is excellent, and that's very good to have provided for that. But are we ensuring that they're doing what they're going to say they're doing with the money?
Why is that? Oh, yeah, it's working now. Thank you. Yes, we won't be releasing any funds until we have their milestones document. We've built into the paper, you'll see that we need to be assured by their own procurement processes, and we need to ensure that they are obtaining value for money from that. So there will be standardized grant agreements, but there will also be very project-specific ones as well.
Thank you. Philippa.
Thank you. A related question, and I'm not an accountant. I could do with a couple of other columns in this. It might make it a landscape document, but clearly there's a lot of round numbers there. With the notable example of Somersham, I want to go and have a look at that actually, because we've got a repair cafe too. I would like some indication as to what percentage 40,000 is of the full cost, because we can all see just from very general description that you need a bit more money than 40,000. And also, I don't mind being a subject of a little bit of moral blackmail to know if there's match funding, because on the whole, match funding looks like a good thing. It does put a bit of extra pressure on us, but it would give us an idea about whether this will actually happen. And I don't like the thought of all this performance going into giving them such a small amount of what they need that it probably won't happen. Then it's all got to come back into the pot and be looked at again. That's my query, because in other circumstances, I've certainly seen a column that gives you a bit of an idea of that. Yet you might still think, well, this is such an important one. Let's go ahead with it. But we will have an idea this might come back, this money, and we might be able to use it for something else. Just a thought.
Thank you. Yes, we can provide that information. We have that information. We don't have it in a tabular or spreadsheet form, but we can pull that together and provide that information.
That's not an action point for now, Chair. It's just a thought that it's helpful when it comes to us and we've not been part of the process. We get a better picture of where our money's going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Claire, you're next.
Yes, thank you. I want to speak up for the communities that put in the applications, particularly because it was a complicated process, an expression of interest followed by the main application process, and people committed time and effort and quite a lot of expertise, I'm sure, at local level to put these applications in and to make them robust. So I want to celebrate the people who put in the applications, including those who didn't quite make it, and those whose projects we see here before us, an interesting mix of projects. I suppose, and also just to reflect that the scoring panel did include members as well as officers. I suppose a question, and I'm really pleased that we were able to include those who scored 75 and over. I think all the projects were good projects, and it's really good to have a spread across the county, a spread of different kinds of projects, and a spread across the county. I suppose just a point of reflection. And this really is for the officers, the two-stage process. You've mentioned that in your summing up in your presentation, Jill. Looking back on that now, can you take some learning from the process? Is there, when you're reflecting on it, would you do things differently or not?
Thank you, Councillor Daunton. Would I do things differently? I suppose that was the process that I inherited. I came into post after the May meeting where, but if we were to take some learning from it, perhaps have a shorter time for the expression of interest, and that would have shortened the whole process. 10 weeks to know whether a group's eligible, as opposed to a full application, was probably more than that was necessary. Human nature is such, and we're all the same, I know, but you know, I think 99% of both the expressions of interest and the full applications came in on the deadline day. So I have a feeling that perhaps we could have shortened it. The only other thing I would say is that possibly we did try to manage expectations, but it is possible that people thought because they were eligible that meant it more likely that they would get the funding. But we were really clear on the application form, all the correspondence and any contact we had afterwards, that we knew how oversubscribed and how competitive the process would be. What I wouldn't change is having the two-stage process. I think there were huge benefits in September when we were able to filter out the ones that weren't going to be eligible, and so they wouldn't be spending any more time on it. But it then gave us a finite cohort of organisations to support and work with, or at least to offer the support and to communicate with, see how people were getting on, did they need our help, etc., etc. And that, rather than having an open process at that stage, was helpful. And finally, it also meant we could plan the timescale, how long we would need, how many people we would need, because it was a very short time from the deadline just before Christmas until today's meeting. And if it had been open and there'd been 500 that we were going to be having to score and then bring back, that would have made things very difficult. So it was helpful in overall, but we could perhaps shorten that first bit.
Thank you. Over to Alex.
Thank you, Chair. I really am pleased that we can do have this amendment to fund the 75 and over, because I think there was cross-party agreement in the spokes and when we were discussing the different applications that if we're going to allocate a certain amount of money for communities, it should be spent as much as possible, as close as possible to our target on those community projects, because as has been said so far, even some of the ones below the 75 threshold were really, good applications. So the quality of applications was really high. So I'm really pleased we can do that. I wonder though if for the, if there are any other, lessons learned or next rounds in the future, whether it would be worth thinking about what made a successful application over the 75 or 80. To just draw a parallel, when we do the local highways improvement applications, I think this year or like in the last round, the team put some examples so communities know like how would something that does get funded look like. And of course, each application on this is quite individually, depends on the area, depends on the project, but it might be helpful linking to the public speakers' comments. It's often very, working in the third sector myself, it's like really frustrating when you actually don't know why you really didn't make it through the list of 75 or 80 or over, when perhaps someone in a neighboring village or neighboring town had a very similar application to you but did get through. So I think this kind of, what are the examples of successful applications like we do now with the LHI schemes would be really helpful if we were to do anything similar in the future. But yeah, it's good to reflect on the feedback from both some of the applications who were successful and those who didn't make it through and what they found useful or not in the process. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Anybody else wish to comment or have a question at all? No? Okay, well, before we go to the vote on the amendment, I just want to say thank you very much for all the work that the team have done on this, because it's quite an exhaustive process. And as was said, the scoring panel, we helpfully said, lovely, but what about the others, please? And can we get all those done? Which you achieved, Jill, so thank you very much for that. And our questioner earlier, I think, of course, he and his community will want, Mr. McKee and the community there will want feedback. So if we can do that, I think as part of the process, that would be very useful. So we'll vote first on the amendment that I moved and that was seconded by Councillor Bulat, the exact wording of which is published on our meeting website. So is everybody clear on what we're voting for? As it's been proposed and seconded, I'll ask those in favour to please raise their hands. Thank you. And those against? None. That is unanimous. So thank you very much. But we will, however, go to the actual report recommendations next, which is A, to agree to fund the following 15 applications to the Cambridgeshire Priorities Capital Fund. I won't list them all. We're all familiar with them. And B, agree to reduce the minimum score to 75 for applications to be recommended for funding. And C, subject to recommendation B, agree to fund the following 11 applications, which are listed below. So I propose that we take those on block. I get the impression we're all agreed. Is that the case? Or yeah, thank you very much. Okay, that is done. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time. And we'll go on to item 6, which is the high intensity users funding agreement with the Integrated Care Board. That's some title, isn't it? But that'll be presented also by Jill and also Programme Director of Strategic Commissioning, Jonathan Bartram, who joins us as well. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. So I'm going to be presenting the report today, but Jonathan, who's from the Integrated Care System, is here to take any technical questions you may have. So we're here today to seek the approval of the committee to enter into a Section 256 agreement with the Integrated Care Board and for the agreement to be signed under seal. A Section 256 agreement is a mechanism by which the ICB can passport funds across to the local authority. And the one that we're discussing today has been drawn up specifically for this piece of work and isn't linked to any other monies that would move between the two major statutory infrastructure organisations. The funding, the £900,000 involved, will enable us to pilot a new way of working in partnership with our health colleagues, and also a new way of working with adults who attend accident emergency departments more than 10 times a year, but who are presenting with issues that are more social in nature and cannot be met by the health emergency departments. The Section 256 agreement has been reviewed by Pathfinder Legal, by my own department, by Finance, and we've been supported throughout by colleagues in adult commissioning who are very familiar with the passporting of funds and the work between the ICB and ourselves. Subject to today's approval, we will be able to start recruitment to the posts and we'll be able to start the work. So the work is to create a new team. This is a funding stream that's coming from NHS England via the ICB. And the new team will be working directly with these high intensity users, high impact users. The I is a bit interchangeable, who are willing to work with us to look at how they may be better supported to access better support more local to in their communities or other services in a more planned way, rather than resorting to the pattern of turning up at accident and emergency. We have some people in the system who, sadly turn up once a week. And we have, high numbers of people that fall into this category. It's fairly clear that that cohort may also be known to us and other parts of the county council, as well as to health. And so there's overall benefits in getting to know those individuals better and trying to divert them into more appropriate support and to better meet their needs elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much, Jill. Bryony.
Thank you. In terms of this new team that's being formed, can you tell us a bit more about the recruitment? Are we looking at an established team that we're moving over, or is this a completely new recruitment process? And how are you planning that? Is that in terms of established workers, staff who've got experience in working in this, or is this a totally new thing?
Thank you. It is a totally new team. We're subject to today. We have a slot next week at the job evaluation panel with HR to look at the job descriptions. And once we're satisfied that we've got those right, which should be, hopefully the same day, we will be able to start the recruitment for the team. In terms of experience and so on, the whole HIU work stream is relatively new, but we are confident that we will have people either already working in the local authority or in health or elsewhere who have that experience that will be able to transfer across into these roles in terms of that direct work. In a sort of coaching, behaviour change, linking in with other support, etc. Roles. The posts are, the whole project is for 18 months. And so we will be putting it out internally as secondment opportunities. And obviously, if people come from other organisations, then it'd be on fixed term contracts.
And in terms of risk, what kind of level is the risk at of not being able to recruit into this team and therefore the project not being able to deliver what we'd like it to?
So I'm fairly confident, as you can be, that we've had a lot of interest. People have known we put the expression of interest in October. It was offered to us in November, and since then we've been working on the contract. And people get to hear that this is happening, and we've been batting off people coming to us saying, let me know when this goes live. This sounds just what I want to be doing. So yes, I am confident that we will recruit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have Philippa and then Claire.
Yeah, there's clearly a tremendous amount of potential here, isn't there? I'm just amazed anybody thinks they could manage it, because you can immediately think of 24 organisations who want to have a go at this. I'm so glad you said secondment in response to Bryony, because I can see there'd be people who wouldn't want to lose their best, but they might find this a really good way of having some getting involved in saying what we need. It's clearly going to open up all sorts of things that we think should be put together, we know should be put together. And some of it will end up with wanting to actually build assets or provide services that we've got only probably not quite enough money for. So best of luck with this. It's really worth a really good endeavour. And I'm sure there's lots of people who want to just, stick an idea in. If you've got a suggestions box, it's going to be crammed. As far as the county council is concerned, we presumably could, through you, identify who is leading the team, or is at least taking the messages. And we can guess at the different NHS trusts that are going to be involved and in what way. Thank you for identifying. I'd be quite proud if the county council can bring this together, because it needs doing, doesn't it? And that's really, it's not a question, is it? Sorry, I've gone on a bit because it's such a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. If you wanted to respond, I also wanted to welcome you, Jonathan, as well, because you're a key part of this. And the Integrated Care Board have really been very helpful. So I'm not sure if you wanted to come in at some stage and just say a few words.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. So just to introduce myself, I'm John Bartram, I'm Programme Director within the Integrated Care Board, with the Health Inequalities portfolio sitting under my remit as well. So what I wanted to stress is actually this programme is very much designed in trying to tackle some of the systemic health inequalities that we have. And one of the reasons why we decided that we needed to open this up in a much more partnership working and to test a new model of care is because we acknowledge the NHS and the health partners cannot tackle some of what's driving the high intensity use of A&E services. If anybody is familiar with it, and if they're not and they're interested, there is a fantastic report carried out by the British Red Cross entitled Nowhere Else to Turn, that really highlights some of the issues that's driving some of the high intensity use of A&E services. And it's great to be able to offer this opportunity out through Cambridgeshire County Council. I don't know whether there's any specific points you want me to touch on around the HIU programme, but this is a core element. We have a separate element that the ICB is also running through our primary care and integrated neighbourhood colleagues, working through GP practices that also are looking at rising risk of patients who may be attending or are likely to attend on a more intense basis. So this is one of those key components of a much broader programme.
Thank you. That is very helpful. Thank you. We've got Claire and then Henry.
You've just mentioned partnership. So could you say a little bit more about how the partnership will work out in practice in relation to this section 256? I mean, we're used to dealing with section agreements in adults and health, and there have been questions around those. So I'd like to know a little bit more about exactly how the partnership will work out, and taking up Councillor Goodliffe's question, the risks to both parties. And then my second question relates to the future. This is an 18-month pilot. What plans are there for the future?
In terms of the partnership and the risks, I'll answer that bit and then I'll pass over to Jonathan. So the partnership is with the ICS ourselves, and will also involve Peterborough City Council and other bodies such as the Ambulance Trust, etc., who will have oversight of the actual work stream. The work stream is coming from NHS England, and so it has a certain framework that we have to operate within and reporting requirements, etc. The team is just hosted, so it's quite an unusual, new, novel way of working in that we're not being commissioned to deliver a health function. We're hosting a team that will because the needs of the people that we're going to be working with, although the funding's coming from health, aren't health needs. It's just trying to meet the social needs and trying to work in a different way with them. So yes, the overall governance will sit in that partnership that involves many partners, not just ourselves. But the delivery of this part of the HRU work will sit in my team. It will have 2 managers overseeing it, and then the practitioners, 7 practitioners under them. And we will be covering Cambridgeshire and Peterborough through this. In terms of the risks, the financial risk around redundancy, hopefully we will have mitigated. If they're coming externally, then it will just be 18 months. If they're internal candidates, then we are going for secondments, because clearly people aren't going to want to take that risk of leaving a full-time job. In terms of extending, or the risk in terms of the we will be invoicing very quickly for the money, don't worry. And they're very keen to pass the money across. It sits very separate from any other arrangement, yeah, I think that's it in terms of risk.
Can I just add that because of the level of funding, the ICB is also committing additional funding to fully evaluate the effectiveness of this service, to look at the longer term investment into this new model of care. So that is a responsibility the ICB will carrying out in terms of ensuring value of expenditure and return on investment, to ensure a much longer, well, hopefully to ensure a longer term approach in tackling this very important issue.
Okay, thank you very much. Henry, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Jill, you may have actually covered this in your introduction, so apologies if I'm asking you to repeat yourself. But what I'm interested in is sort of the competitiveness of the process that the County Council went through to actually become awarded this. I mean, what I'm sort of trying to ascertain is if it was a highly competitive process, and this actually is a bit of a coup for the County Council to have come out on top throughout this process. I mean, that should be something that we should be probably shouting about and, you know, promoting from, you know, internally. So, yeah, I'd just be interested to hear a bit more about the process that the county went through to get to this stage.
I'm going to suggest we answer that together because I only knew the process at the point that we submitted. But yes, it was a competitive process, and we submitted the expression of interest, had to give a lot of detail about how we would host, how we would manage, what we would, you know, the full detail you would expect in a competitive process. And I know that there were 2 or 3 others.
Yeah, so as been mentioned, it was an expression of interest process. We did have other applications. A formal scoring process took place alongside our contracts and commissioning team, and we were delighted to offer the opportunity to Cambridgeshire County Council, who came out on top.
Hey, anybody else? Philippa, yeah.
It is a question this time because it's come out of the discussion. I'm thinking confidential data sharing here, knowing what a headache it can be for even two NHS trusts to share stuff. And we are asking a lot, we're going to want the input of specialist charitable organisations who may not have a dedicated data protection officer or two or three. Is that going to be part of what the county council is expected to provide? Is the advice on data sharing, or is that no? Are you both going to want the other one to do it?
No. I offered. So the work started on an information sharing agreement, and that will be initiated at the health end, and needs to capture all the individual bits of the health system before, as well as ourselves, and as you say, Philippa, any councillor, any other organisations that need to be involved. My understanding from talking to colleagues at the ICS is that it's just as tricky to share information across health as it is between health and ourselves. So that work is underway. Thank you.
Excellent. Anybody else at all? No, but thank you very much. Another excellent piece of work, and to get £900,000 of funding over 18 months is a great achievement. And I know it's been very much a joint effort as well. And relations with the ICB are key, I think, to our success. I think it'll be a very good project. So thank you, Jonathan, for coming to see us. Thank you very much, Jill, as always. So we've got two recommendations: authorise the council to enter into a Section 256 agreement with the ICB for receipt of funding to host the high intensity users operational team, and B, delegate authority to the Executive Director of Strategy and Partnerships in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of Communities to sign the agreement under seal. I think we have a consensus here, am I correct? So we are all in agreement. Thank you both. And we'll move on to item 7, which is closer to communities interim update, be presented by the project manager, Jessica Kennedy. I'd also like to welcome two familiar faces. Interim Service Director of Highways and Transport, David Allett, and Head of Service for Cambridgeshire Skills, Tom Malloy. Also joined by the Child and Family Centre Manager in Cambridge City, Sally Stevenson. You're all very welcomed here, and some excellent work happening, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. This report seeks to provide an update on Closer to Communities and bring the work to life with speakers from the pilots themselves. I will begin with providing a recap so far. This work was approved at COSMIC in July 2023. 17 pilots were identified spanning all service directorates and districts across the county. These pilots were developed to test 4 key themes and approaches to decentralisation, which are devolved decision-making, devolved power and funding, co-designed and co-produced, and place-based and targeted approaches. This work recruited myself as project manager for the period of October 23 to March 25. Officer governance arrangements have been established across all directorates, and the Governance Board is chaired by the Executive Director for Strategy and Partnerships. Regular pilot updates are collected to capture progress and learning. Within our early findings, opportunities have been identified, which include providing a safe space to reflect and consider how residents receive or access help from the council, including real-life examples and feedback which create positive opportunities to change the culture. Some service areas felt that they already worked in a decentralised way and were resistant initially to the approach, sometimes failing to grasp how the work of their team or service could be delivered differently to enhance the way residents experience council services and support. Some services do already work in a decentralised way and are keen to find ways of communicating, celebrating, and providing opportunities for learning from their approach with senior leaders, colleagues, and elected members. Early findings were responded to by actions such as developing evaluation workshops for the pilot leads, creating new cross-directorate opportunities to bring colleagues together and enable new ideas and collaborative approaches to inform the plan for the coming year. It is also key to identify the emerging appetite to do more together across directorates and to refine the approach to testing decentralisation methods. With regards to early findings, I would also like to highlight a couple of considerations. Supporting services that do and don't work closer to communities to promote work or provide constructive feedback and challenge to shift the culture takes time and skill. This approach requires significant input in the initial stages, often before any benefits are realised. These steps include actions such as aligning priorities, designating resource and capacity, and allocating roles and responsibilities. Once these steps are in place, the benefits can begin to be realised. Where a pilot involves devolving power and funding to another organisation, ongoing expertise and capacity from the council is likely to be required. Over time, this may reduce, or the council may take on the role as facilitator or convener. This is something we look to track over the next year. As we continue to develop, our focus and next steps are based on deepening the learning from pilots through refining the project and the planning of a member workshop due to take place in May, June. A Closer to Communities full evaluation and recommendations will be due in March 2025. The final recommendations will link to the 4 themes and include best practice and consistent methods to co-design and co-produce alongside communities, tested methods of working at place and with devolved budgets, and a blueprint for decision-making processes that could further roll out across the county. I will now hand over to Tom, Head of Service for Cambridgeshire Skills, and Sally, Child and Family Centre Manager in Cambridge City, who will present updates on 2 of the original pilots, and then to David, Interim Service Director of Highways and Transport, who will share with us some of the emerging work in the Closer to Community space. Thank you.
Afternoon all, thank you Chair, thank you Jess. So Cambridgeshire Skills are running one of the projects which covers all the areas, and it's focused on the Oxmoor estate, so targeted an area with high levels of need, and we've been working with Hunts Nursery, the Children and Family Centres, and colleagues from the DWP to produce a very localised offer. It's gone from strength to strength, and by working with these services, we've developed a programme that addresses outcome for whole families and supports social mobility. It's unique in a number of ways. For starters, one of the issues that was highlighted to us that when different organisations identify someone with a skills need and kind of get them warmed up for a course, be it English or maths or something similar, they often have to wait a long time to enrol at one of the colleges, which start with sort of set dates in September. Therefore, we're running a rolling programme for English and maths, which that works in a simple way that basically say a course is split into 10 units, they're run each week, you can join at each week, and then the course repeats itself so people can enrol at any time. Currently, we've got 8 courses running on the Oxmoor, which is more than we've ever had. We've got 18 learners in a maths course, which is remarkable, again, for adult learning classes, again, where you're normally sort of like 8 to 12 to have 18. And we've currently got a full cohort of learners doing the level 1 in support work and school, and they're all about to progress onto level 2. And we're going to start another level 1 course imminently. So it's proving to be a really successful model, and again, this is only sort of just 12 months in. Currently, at this point, so I think it's 131 enrolments since the inception, and as we stand, this is something we're certainly looking to continue and roll out a similar model elsewhere in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, members. I'm Child and Family Centre Manager for the City team. So we've got 5 child and family centres, and I was asked to bring to life some of the projects that have been happening over the last 6 months, really, and what's happening on the ground. So we've very much adopted the message of recycle, repurpose and reconnect. So it's recycling anything we can, we throw away very little. Repurposing, I've done some slides, so if I wanted to be available anytime, but some of the innovation that's coming out from the ideas of what the children and the families are developing from boxes, bottles, anything else that we can do, and reconnect with nature. We had 4-year-olds that were taking out cameras to take pictures of the environment, and we entered them into a national competition and they won 2nd prize. And none of the entrants were above 4 years old, which was amazing, really. We try very much in the centres to source locally if we are buying anything. So that's from local providers, improving the Cambridge pound. And it's also making sure that they're ethically based so that they're using sustainable products. It does cost a little bit more, but it's much better than getting from some of the larger delivery organisations that we use. One of our main successes, and we're hoping to duplicate that on the south side of the city, is the toy library running from Brownsfield was at point of closure. Volunteers had moved on to different jobs, and it was really a good resource that was used in the community that might not have been active. So we refurbed that. We've bought some more storage, some more storage boxes. We've used and worked in partnership with Brownsfield, and we've got between 10 and 15 families a week, not all the same families, that come to use that. And we've also been able to source some extra sensory toys for those children with additional needs. Hopefully we've just come up with an opportunity this week. We might be able to duplicate that again in the south, where there's a toy library that might be at risk of closure. We have clothes banks, which are where pre-loved items are redistributed. They used to be called clothes swap. Current environmental climate and the financial needs of the families mean that some haven't got anything to swap, so they come in and collect. And if families can't come into us, we get the clothes out to them. Especially, it's been vitally important. I think we've done 6 just recently with families where they're expecting a new baby and have fled domestic violence and have come into the city, so we can do a whole baby bale and look after the other children as well. We've started sourcing books from the local library, so where they can donate their old stock to us, children get gifted a book as well if they need, so they've got items to read at home. Done lots of activities to do with growing and letting children experience how plants grow, encouraging families to grow stuff at home, and we'll be linking in with it. Grow it at home, cook it at home, save some money at home. Those are the theories that come through. All of our centres have bug hotels. One was called a bug hostel because the children didn't quite line everything up when they made it. And pollinator areas, so they're learning about increasing biodiversity in their immediate environment and see that coming in. Lots of outdoor activities, obviously, all the way through that. But what are we doing next? Well, we've set the seeds, small changes first, but we really need to know where our parents and families are coming from, what they know already, what they want to know, what they think they can manage, and giving them a bit more confidence on their skills. So with I'll give you an example of that. With our clothes bank, we do a make do amend session because people think, I can't mend that. I can't turn those school trousers up. They don't fit. I'll have to go out and buy new. Actually, we're changing that message that we're giving out to families to say, yeah, you can. Okay, we've got a box full of trousers there. We'll just get some to fit. We'll make them fit. We'll put the buttons on. Things like that. We're also doing, all our staff have done the net zero training and climate and environment. So we're now sending out a question to say, you've learned it, what are you doing now? What would you like to know more about? What are you putting into practice every day at work? We're also doing a bigger exploration at Chesterton Child and Family Centre on starting some feasibility and some conversations around using heat pumps and solar panels because the site lends itself to being able to use those. it's an exploration, but we have to start somewhere with it. We're also trying to work in partnership with a local market garden at Cove Farm so that we can get families over to that development where there's a market garden and then come into the centre to learn cooking skills and everything using those. And we've had a great pleasure of being able to join in with Holly's Active Stars. I don't know if anyone's familiar with a charity that was set up late last year where we're going to recycle and repurpose school, sports equipment generically for those young people who haven't got sports equipment to be able to use them at school, and to be able to move in with clubs and things like that, so they don't have to go in their school uniform. We're going to be 2 collection points, so one's going to be at the Fields and one's going to be at North, and we're going to act with that charity to redistribute all of that sports equipment and footwear. That's where we're at. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to pause here and just ask if anybody wants to put any questions, or should we hear from David next and take them at the end? Any questions? Over to you, David. We'll go to you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll briefly touch on 3 initiatives. This pilot's been a great opportunity for us to focus in on specific issues that we know are important to our communities, and to objectively assess how can we best serve our places in the way that they want to be served from Highways and Transport. So one area that was flagged up was street lighting, and a sense from our communities that the issue was somewhat impenetrable with multiple different stakeholders and contracts, and not much of a sort of sense of a front door. So we've listened, and we continue to listen and work. We're working specifically with Girton Parish with a view to identifying scalable improvements across the way that we provide our streetlight services to ensure that we can provide more clarity and information to our customers about where our street lighting assets are, who owns the asset, and the processes and procedures associated with making change to the street lighting. And as I've said before, through a single front door rather than being passed through various local authority and contractor organisations. The second initiative I wanted to talk about was related to local decision making and the Cambridge Joint Area Committee, which will be a key advisory and decision-making role in the city in partnership with the County Council on local transport issues. So this is a decision-making body upon which we have drafted the terms of reference, held an initial workshop with members in preparation for the first meeting in the spring, but that will relate to key local issues such as local highways improvements in the city, residents parking, etc. Finally, a new pilot relating to how we interact with local parishes. And it stems again, it relates to the co-design and co-production work stream. We spoke quite recently with Wisbech St Mary's Parish, who highlighted that from a transport perspective, they felt a mismatch between setting the art of the possible and understanding what local people wanted to achieve and marrying that up with the funding opportunities to deliver on those things, and the sense that the local highways initiative was the only way of doing that. We want to change that, and we're going to be working with Wisbech St Mary again on an approach that we want to scale elsewhere to help to shape local investment proposals relevant to their network and the public realm, to understand and explore the delivery models and potential funding sources for driving those forward, working with district partners, for example, and to then effectively to be able to follow up on that plan. And I recognise that at the moment the role that the County Council has played in neighbourhood plans, whilst we have commented on them, we see this as an opportunity to redefine that relationship and role to be able to drive forward transport improvements with the parishes.
Okay, thank you very much. From all of you, I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions, starting with Claire.
Thank you very much. I was pleased to hear about the project. I've got a very general question, and the projects are all over the county. Have you developed a mechanism for involving members in communicating with members and involving local members in the working out of the projects? That's my general question. I've got I have lots of questions for what David has said, but I'll save the time for others. My particular question is about the integrated neighbourhood. The text here tells me that it's piloting the development of a one-team approach and that there's been a workshop. Where is that going to be? Where is the pilot actually going to take place?
Thank you, Councillor. So with regards to your first point, yesterday at the governance board, we had our comms representative attend the board and we discussed the communications with members and that we feel that that needs to be stronger. So perhaps from all elements. So from the pilots themselves, we're looking to develop some guidance around how they can best update you on the pilots that are within their patch. And then also from the perspective of the wider portfolio, I did make reference in my brief opening around a potential for a member workshop in May, June time. So this is something that we're looking to plan and firm up details for. So if there are any suggestions about what you'd like to see within that workshop, I can prepare that and bring that to you. Thank you.
But before you answer my next question, I'll come back to you on that. I think it's particularly important for members to know where these projects are taking place, and particularly if there are separate negotiations or communications going in with parish councils, that when we go to a parish council meeting, we don't hear that the county council has been working with the parish council. We only hear it at the parish council meeting. I think it's really important to be part of the overarching partnership.
Thank you, Councillor. So that's absolutely a priority of ours. So I've noted that and we'll take that forwards. I'm happy to answer the second one if that's so the second one around the integrated neighbourhood. This pilot itself is taking place in Cambridge City. So our coordinator in the community service is our representative from county who's sitting on this multi-agency board at the moment.
Just have a question to David and then I'll keep quiet. Thanks, David, for all the information. I'm really pleased to hear all the things that are going on in relation to highways and transport. It's to do with the street lighting. In the text here, new communities are specifically mentioned, but what you're doing is working with new communities and established communities, I understand. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jeff, and then Alex.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a specific question about a specific initiative, but I make the general observation that I mean, a lot of these initiatives that we have before us and pilots cut across many of the things that are already being done by other agencies or indeed the council. The particular one that I want to explore with you is the first one, smoking cessation, which is pretty high on the agenda, certainly of the Health Committee here and the NHS and indeed government, as we saw yesterday with its planned legislation to try and stop youngsters starting to smoke. Well, I'm not telling you anything you don't know there. We all agree that it's a good thing if people give up smoking. We know that there's a particular problem in Fenland for a variety of reasons that have been explained to us before. I was interested in the words that you used there and what precisely the integrated neighbourhood manager, presumably this is the initiative we're going to employ, or this agency, that voluntary agency, will be able to employ an additional member of staff. What is he going to be doing, she be doing that is not already being done? Because there's just so much going out to raise awareness for stopping smoking. And I'm particularly interested, I laugh because you're saying here, specifically using behavioural science. It almost sounds sinister, but what does it precisely mean? And just on words as well, sorry, while I'm asking the question, and to stop smoking services to homeless clients, presumably homeless people and staff. Homeless staff, it's just wording there, but let's go back to the behavioural science bit.
Sure, thank you, councillor. So I would firstly acknowledge that with regards to the pilots themselves, so we collect a monthly highlight report where the pilots feed in progress on the project themselves. So what I'd like to do is take away an action to get further detail on some of the wording around the pilot. I think what I'd then like to acknowledge is that the focus of this work around closer to communities and my role is to gather the learning and recommendations from the work itself. So less focused on the activity that's happening and more around what learning and recommendations we can gather from the way in which they're doing the work. So I don't have the exact detail around the behavioural science actions, but I can take that away and bring it to you.
We had, sorry if I can come back very, very quickly, we had a major presentation to us by, well, was it ICB? I can't remember now, at the Health Committee. I remember several people presented all the initiatives that they are undertaking, specifically in Finland. So there is a vast body of information around. I'm not saying that this is perhaps something you know, but you can go back to that committee and see the vast paperwork that was presented to us. And as I say, there literally doesn't. Now I can understand getting an individual in to take on a very specific role in a specific community, although I do think that they have people out in Finland that do have.
Jeff, I think Sue's got an update actually, which you might find useful.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
yeah, that's fine.
Just to say, when we heard previously from on the item about high intensity users, and we were hearing from the integrated care system, the ICS, and the integrated care board, lots of acronyms. That the work that is what is being referred to here, and this particular project is led by Public Health, and the behavioural insights methodologies are ones that the public health colleagues will be using and will be done as part of that wider health system response. So the advantage of what is happening here with Closer to Communities is it connects across a whole range of other committees, a whole range of other partners. But what we're trying to do through the Closer to Communities work is to recognise what partners are doing, what our public health colleagues are doing, but specifically to say in the activity that you're doing around smoking cessation, how are you getting closer to a community? What can we learn through this particular initiative that will help us to do that in a more effective way across a whole range of activity? So I just want to assure you that absolutely it is those partners that you hear from in the Health and Wellbeing Committee or in Adults and Health Committee whose work we're capturing here, but specifically trying to understand the aspect of that work that means we are being better informed and better connected with how we deliver a service with the communities that are coming to us for that type of support and advice and help. So it's I hope that helps to explain. Thank you.
It does. Thank you very much. What I was really getting at is the work additional? And you're saying it is. It provides another layer, another level of understanding to make it more effective. I accept that. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got Alex next, followed by Ken.
Thank you. First of all, I'm really pleased to see the report and all the progress, the tangible progress explained on the pilots, and I'll be really keen to see the more strategic conclusion around the devolved funding, the co-designed aspects, place-based and the targeted support as well. It will come as it was mentioned in a forthcoming paper later on, because I think the whole purpose of having a diverse range of pilots is to actually see what conclusions we can draw at the strategic level to implement across council services later on. I wanted to ask like an overall question, if anyone wants to comment on whether there were any examples from your pilot work where a decentralized approach didn't work or didn't work as well as expected, and why it didn't, because so far we heard out about the positives examples where it did work. So I was wondering if there's any counter argument to that, if you found anything in your projects for that. And then my second question is specifically around the Joint Area Committee, the CJAC in Cambridge City, which links to Councillor Dunton's questions around involvement of local members. And I think it's really good to hear the update that there is a comms plan to involve local members. I'll give like one specific example. So for instance, in my division, I have an LHI project that passed on the consultation has finished, but usually you take in some cases a delegate decision as a county councillor when you have a number of objections as well as support on an LHI scheme. But now we were told that, well, this will be decided by CJAC, which I know it's under kind of CJAC rules now, but I think no one was really aware at the local level. And now we have this gap really between, let's say, the consultation being like finalized a month ago to, the first CJAC meeting being in the summer. And I understand we needed to sort out the terms of reference and so on. But this is one example where communication with local members is really important because, for example, myself and, colleagues in the city as well are actually able to explain why, it's perhaps taking longer than anticipated to implement the project. So if David Allott want to comment on that kind of engagement with local members, it will be quite good. I'm sure this is not the only case in which members are wondering about kind of updates. And I see Councillor Dunton has a perhaps similar experience in her division. Thank you.
I think, Lisa, you wanted to come in at this point?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'm going to come to David for the second half of the question, if that's okay, on CJAC. But really on the what's gone less well or some of those learnings. I think one key theme that's come through from some of the projects where they were testing devolved budgets is the complexity and the challenge that poses where it's being done within a single service environment. So some of the targeted support work, for example, some of it's gone really, really well, but where it's gone really well, it's where that team knows their place really well. They've had the data available, partnerships are really strong, and where people have been able to come together collectively quite quickly to mobilise the response and to put something in place. Where people have struggled on that is perhaps where they haven't had the capacity to work across that partnership space to really make the best use of what is a small amount of money. Actually, we thought that it would go really quickly. So having taken some of that feedback on board, that's something that we really want to refine how we test over the coming months. And that's one of the proposals moving forward into April, that we'll go again at the devolved budgets in place, but we will do it differently. So Jill, who you've heard from today already, is going to coordinate across the district teams through the communities, across our internal partners, so communities, libraries, child and family centres. Sally, you'll be delighted to hear this. That coordinated network to really look at a place, what are the priorities and how can we respond with some local funding co-produced alongside families and residents. So we're just changing up what we're doing, but positive results in some areas, less so in some. But I think that's what this work is all about, taking that learning and then driving it forward.
Okay, thank you. We've got Ken next, followed by Philippa and then Vros.
Thank you. This is for highways. You mentioned about street lighting. I'm intrigued to know if you will include the utility supply. Specifically, I have a parish where they are responsible for, by default, for 15 or 20 street lights. They struggled very, very much to find a supplier who would actually supply. Secondly, one that they could actually afford, and that's become a very big drain on their resources. Is there a plan or an opportunity for the county to take them back into highways?
I think if I'm able to take that problem away and explore it as part of this work stream, there is certainly more we can do as a county council to help align suppliers and communities, but clearly further work to do in exploring what the art of the possible is longer term. But I will take that away and consider as part of this work stream.
And David, I didn't come back to you for the second half of the question, which Lisa kindly volunteered for you to answer. But
yeah,
you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, apologies. Well, I wasn't sure if it was a question or a comment. I agree with I agree that the greater role of local members in local decision making relative to their patch is absolutely key. It has taken time to agree the terms of reference and understand how that decision making can work against the constitution and the role that officers can have to support it. And I think just as a general point, I think it's a really good thing. And the more that we involve members in shaping this important group, the better. Apologies if there was a specific question that I missed, Councillor Bullard.
Oh, thank you for that. I think what I meant to say is that it seems that in some of the areas, some of the decisions are paused until this first meeting of CJAC is happening. And it'd just be good to have clarity on that. I think that's the experience of several councillors, and this means that, of course, our projects will be taking longer because we're waiting for this first meeting, because the CJAC now has some powers that previously were different. That was kind of my point, that it would just be helpful for us to communicate that if that is indeed the case across.
It's not the case. I think part of the reason that the agenda was delayed for the start was the timing of the decisions that were coming through, but it's not the case that business has ground to a halt in the meantime.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. It's, I think our residents will appreciate that, so I can communicate it back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Philippa and then Ros.
Yes, I was interested in the street lighting. I think Councillor Billington has provided an example of where decentralisation is problematical and may need extra support. Not to say that there shouldn't be decentralised decision making, but the funding does need to be adequate to the needs. So my street lighting issues are more to do with unadopted roads, as you might well guess, because certainly there's lots of councillors who've got casework piling up on things that nobody will take responsibility for, and street lighting and shrub beds and all that sort of stuff that goes with this awful years and years of no government responsibility. If you're advent on the scene of street lighting, David, can in any way help with that, that would be great, because otherwise it's in danger to mental health of the councillors, actually, and we do like to take a holistic approach. If there's any chance of poo powered lighting, that would be great. We got a lot of dog poo, and I gather you can turn it into methane. Please, an update on that one. Seriously, though, Councillor Daunton is absolutely right. The councillors have got lots of incidental, useful information, probably not the poo lights, but our casework crosses across all your departments, and it points up the problems that you are now getting to grips with, and that is so welcome. And you probably saw a very calculated look. Is it Sally? Yeah, I'm Trumpington, and you know, we'd like a bit of the action too down there, and so I'll be in touch. Thank you, because your projects sound great. Thank you.
Okay, I wasn't sure if there was a question in there. Was it more of a comment?
It was. Don't forget that street lights are unadopted. There's thousands of them.
Okay. Did you want to
and
respond
that
to David?
didn't get mentioned in there. That was all.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. I recognise this as an issue. Usually when my phone rings for a non-work related call, it's from a friend who lives on a non-adopted road. And this is a problem nationwide. It's a very difficult problem to solve, but of course, it's a problem that's felt locally and a significant challenge. So I think it's absolutely right to raise it, and it's right that we continue to look at how we can best support communities on this. I'm not sure I'm best equipped to advance the dog poo solution, but I will take that. I will take that away as well.
Now Ros, to be followed by Ian.
The children's centres project sounded absolutely amazing, and yeah, and making things like clothing banks work, and I'm sure lots of people would love to donate to things like that. So yes, this whole kind of circular reuse, repurpose, recycle, yeah, that sounds absolutely brilliant. Street lighting, sorry. Yeah, so I think, so yeah, we've had exactly these issues sort of in Orchard Park, and I think Orchard Park Community Council might not say this, but I think, you know, there would be a willingness to pay a fee, a maintenance fee to get, so it's not like the county council has to take on full money. It's that logistical capacity of a tiny organisation to deal with something that they, you know, is very challenging to them. So I think, yeah, the conversation doesn't have to hinge around county taking on more and more financial burden. And also, yeah, how is this the bit? I think it was said that this was transferring to highways, and I just didn't understand what that looked like. Are local members, do we go to our LHO to ask about street lights? You know, what is the process, and how will people be on this committee know when they have their street lighting issues?
I think part of the work stream is to help to answer that question. In the first instance, you can go to the LHO about any issue, but we need to support the LHO in providing the answers, and we have dedicated streetlight resource to assist with that. I think it's a really valuable comment, because you've hit on the essence of this work. It's about what can the county do with communities working together to solve what are difficult challenges to solve. So yes, I think your suggestion's a prime example of give and take, finding solutions, working together.
Okay, thank you. Ian, you're next.
Very much, Chair. Thank you very much for a very good report. What I would have liked to have seen was how those particular schemes impacted on the rural areas, which I don't see. But perhaps you can tell me a bit more about that. I'm now going to plug myself and Councillor Daunton's own particular things, but you know, in the rural areas, we need to be able to connect communities. We need to look at ways that we can get rural people to be able to get between villages, to get to the doctors, to get to school, do all that sort of thing. Now, I'm finding it difficult to try and get a footpath between two of my villages, or a cycleway. Now, they're the sort of things that not only does that increase better health, but it also gives greater connectivity to those villages and what have you. And I do think we need to start looking at how we can improve that. And then, you know, people can get to other villages that have got services where they haven't. It also is better for the environment, because people are quite prepared to walk, they're quite prepared to cycle, but they can't do that down busy roads, and certainly not in the rural areas, down country roads that are, you know, single track and 60-mile-an-hour speed limits. So I do think we need to be looking at that going forward. And, you know, I'm quite happy to talk to you, David, on the particular cycle route that I'm looking for. I know Councillor Daunton has got one as well that she is very keen to get included. So those really were the two main issues, and how you think you can help rural areas, because, you know, there is just as much deprivation in rural areas, or people that need to get to services, but they can't do so because they've got no bus service and they've got no way of getting into towns unless they are relying on other people to give them lifts or whatever. So that was really my comment at this stage, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'd just like to chip in by acknowledging that I appreciate within the rundown of all of the pilots, although a district may have been mentioned, it's not too specific exactly where, so I can take that away and bring a more specific location list if that's helpful, and just acknowledge that they're across all of the pilots, they're across all of the different districts and directorates, so hopefully they'll cover the areas that you're interested in. Thank you.
I'll just make a brief comment that this comment extends beyond the work of this particular set of pilots again, but the work of highways and transport at large. There's a great potential in our rural communities, and we want to unlock that potential, and it begins with connectivity. We're working closely with stakeholders from central government, working with them to change the way that they appraise schemes, working with the combined authority to look at how they can ensure that communities are best served. But ultimately, this is about unlocking the great potential that's there and the great opportunity. So, you know, it's sometimes said that there isn't a business case for this sort of work. Well, that's because the methodology is obviously wrong. So I'll just assure you that we're very motivated to connect our rural communities better and more sustainably, and more enhanced than is presently there.
Can I come back? Thank you very much, David, for those comments. All I would ask is, would it be possible for Councillor Daunton and I to come and talk to you about two schemes that we feel would be very useful in our particular rural areas, because that would create a good deal of connectivity outside the city.
that would, in my view, be fine. I'm sure you'll welcome response. It was a question. I'm just wondering who has the most parishes in their division, Councillor Gardner or Councillor Daunton? Do we know? I think 25 over there. Can you beat that? 20. Oh, you're only 23. Oh, that's, so just a quick question from me for yourself, Tom. Really liked what you were saying about a place I know quite well, which is Huntingdon North, or Oxmoor as it was known. Whereabouts are those courses being held? And secondly, am I right in saying that sort of links into a pilot program where I think we're working with people who've got themselves into some very difficult situations, and we've sort of said to them, well, we can help you with that, but what you need to do is sign up to courses and get those key skills, and then if you do that, we can then start to sort of help you with some of the other issues that you're facing.
Thank you, Chair. So the courses are being run out of the Children and Family Centre and at Hunt's Nursery. So again, and as this is a targeted programme, so it's not one that's advertised, so all the learners are referred, so that again, the agencies that are working in the area are referring directly in. So yes, some of the learners are coming from those programmes that you mentioned.
Thank you. That's Jess, yeah.
And I can pick up on the second question. So I think with regards to the pilot, I think the pilot that you may be referring to is the Huntingdon Council Tax pilot. So that's where the requirement would be almost like a checklist of activity for a resident to get engaged with, which would then enable them to progress with that support.
Yes, that was the one basically. So that's really good news. Thank you. Anybody else at all? Well, thank you very much to all four of you. That's been an excellent update, and for taking all the questions. Really appreciate it. Believe it or not, our only recommendation after all that is to note the contents of the report, but which we've done, I think. But that was very helpful. Very helpful. So we'll go on now to item 8, which is the domestic abuse safe accommodation strategy. It'll be presented by the Safe Accommodation Strategy Manager, Dane Evans. Is that still correct? Dana, sorry, Evans. And you're over there. Perfect timing. Welcome. No, you don't have to stand, and middle button, and Lisa's just going to come up as well.
Thank you. Yeah, my first time in front of this committee, so thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Dana Evans, and I am the Safe Accommodation Programme Manager for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough IDFA service. And I'm here today to submit our report and the recommendations around the safe accommodation strategy for 2024-27. I normally get told I'm too loud. So the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 set it in statute that Tier 1 authorities, and in this instance it's ourselves, the County Council, must publish and prepare a local safe accommodation strategy, which is based on a robust needs assessment. These strategies need to be reviewed every 3 years. And that is the situation that we're in now, where we're looking to review our current strategy and move forward into 24-27. Domestic abuse obviously continues to be a significant issue for all our communities in Cambridgeshire. The National Crime Survey reports 25,000 survivors, victims in Cambridgeshire. We've had 8,250 police incidents where domestic abuse was the flag the police raised, and 1,077 survivors cases heard at our local MARAC in 2022-23. And local MARACs listen to the cases where the survivors are at risk of homicide or high risk of harm. Safe housing and appropriate bespoke domestic support are essential in supporting survivors of domestic abuse and their families to escape. Those providing housing are often the first and sometimes only people that survivors disclose their domestic abuse to. The report that I provided committee with gave an overview of the great work that has been delivered under the current safe accommodation strategy covering the period 2021 to 2024 and provides details of new areas that we have included and the removal and refreshing of the strategy going forward into 2024-27. The safe accommodation strategy is based on a whole housing approach model, and Cambridgeshire County Council and partners were actually one of the key delivery systems in developing this approach and adopting it. It has now been endorsed by the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, Nicole Jacobs, and is referred to within the implementation documents for local authorities around the UK for the safe accommodation strategy delivery. The whole housing approach is intended to provide accommodation-based support, which enables all survivors of domestic abuse to access safe accommodation, regardless of their tenure. It offers specialist domestic abuse staff and flexible, bespoke options within housing to ensure survivors and their families can find safe alternative accommodation. Partnership working is at the heart of the strategy, with housing teams, social housing providers, private landlords and other domestic abuse services across Cambridgeshire working together to find positive outcomes for those in housing crisis. The desired outcomes from the strategy that I'm asking you to adopt today is to continue the provision of our domestic abuse mobile advocacy service across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, to continue the provision of our dispersed safe accommodation units across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, to continue the provision of the existing refuge spaces in Cambridgeshire, to increase support to those with learning difficulties experiencing domestic abuse across Cambridgeshire, and to ensure that survivors of domestic abuse across Cambridgeshire, where possible, can receive domestic abuse support in their first language. The domestic abuse strategy and the work delivered under the auspices of this strategy have been evaluated against the 7 ambitions set out in the Council strategic framework. And the recommendation for today is that I'm asking for approval of the safe accommodation strategy for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, covering the period of April 2024 to March 2027.
Thank you very much. Really appreciated. Bryony, you have a question.
Thank you. I've actually got 3, sorry. Obviously, delighted to hear children and young people mentioned at Cosmic and Ambition 7 in particular. The recognition of the impact of domestic abuse on children and its victims is clearly an important one. Where you mentioned the counselling, and I'm really pleased to see it's specialist trauma-informed counselling and therapeutic support we're offering. I know it says 99 children, but compared to the number of children who are victims of domestic violence, can we have a percentage possibly? If I do all 3 at once, is that easier? Or?
I think I'd have to come back to you on percentages. I wouldn't be able to just pop that out of my head, but I'm very happy to do so. And, you know, if you want a further breakdown on that support that's offered, some of it is within our refuges, some of it through referrals to Embrace, which supports child victims of abuse and crime. And we also have used the flexible funding to support counselling in survivors' first language and their children, which again means that counselling is much more effective for them, but isn't readily available.
Thank you. So moving to 4.6, the managed reciprocal project or programme. As I understand, this is where an individual or a family is housed in another authority, and in return we take a similar approach, making sure that people are given a safe place away from an abuser. Obviously this has huge impact but also removes the individual or the family from their support system and familiar networks. Where we have other councils and their priority systems for housing is very different. Do we investigate the schemes that we're putting families and individuals into? I know one city very recently changed their housing priority, and I won't name the city, Chair, but they've said as a result of these changes, if you were born and bred in city, you will have added priority. You must have lived in this city for continuously for at least 7 years to even be considered for council housing. And those placed into city by other councils in temporary accommodation will not be eligible for city's council housing. Obviously, this will have a huge impact if we're placing really vulnerable people into an area. Are we looking into the housing priority that these reciprocal arrangements are in, and making sure that we are not setting families up and individuals up to obviously have the impact of not being able to gain housing once they've left emergency housing?
So to clarify, the reciprocal scheme, which in actual fact Cambridgeshire County Council led on before the Domestic Abuse Act and this strategy, which is a fantastic thing that we initiated following the Pan-London Agreement. It is a system of moving people who already have a social tenancy directly into another social tenancy. So it is separate to the homeless legislation. It hopefully avoids that need to move into temporary accommodation, because survivors of domestic abuse do get an automatic priority with another local authority into temporary accommodation. But as you have said, due to the localism bill, as I understand it, each local authority can exercise its allocation system as it wants, with an element of reasonable preference to those survivors of domestic abuse, but it is an element of that. So this is very much from one property to another. And again, in terms of allocation systems, separate to homelessness, allocation systems, for example, HomeLink or Jigsaw, they do not offer automatic local connection to those people who need to move to their area due to domestic abuse. A case would need to be made under special circumstances, for example, with HomeLink, which is this area's allocation system. So again, the reciprocal removes that element, that additional kind of barrier to families moving easily to another area without having to move so far that they are isolated from their current support. The only kind of proviso within the offer of accommodation that can be made to them, I think it's the local lettings plans, and if I remember rightly from my housing days, section 106. So if housing has been built with a clear priority for people who occupy a village or have a particular link to that area, those properties cannot be offered under a reciprocal, because there is a specific link to the planning regulations around that. But the hope is that it removes some of the barriers and the stress and the difficulties for families moving, but it isn't a statutory function. No local authority and no housing association has to do a reciprocal, but it is another option for DA survivors in this area. And I'm pleased to say that the majority of housing associations and local authorities that still have stock in this area have looked to try and offer some properties to the reciprocal scheme while balancing that with their own allocations, waiting lists, and their own priorities.
And then finally, looking at the equalities impact assessment, this council has said that they'll treat care experience as a protected characteristic, and given the impact of care experience on people's life experiences and their added vulnerabilities, can we make sure that this is added to the EQIA, please?
Yeah, we definitely will. We'll make sure that there is, I understand, a new template, so I'll make sure that that is built in. And also, I just wanted to say, though they're not part of this strategy, the young person's IDVAs specifically kind of have LACs, looked after children as part of their remit, and have worked really closely over the years with those young people and the services supporting them.
Thank you very much, both. Next, we have Jeff, to be followed by Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I suspect that the answer to my question is in the paper, but just what possibly is a minor aspect of domestic, or certainly there's less incidence of it, I think, is male domestic abuse, and accommodation for males, adult males, certainly. Question, first of all, we are providing that, yes. And
yes.
And for the most part, of course, just putting people into accommodation by itself doesn't solve the problem. They could be there for a long time unless we provide the therapeutic services to, and particularly male who have been domestically abused, do probably need more therapy than anything else, because there's a certain amount of shame to it, and really if they are able to get back into employment as quickly as possible, that will ensure that the accommodation is freed up. I just wonder whether this package includes such therapies and the provision is there for that particular category.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And obviously, I think this week, due to some TV program at the beginning of the week that's obviously sparked a lot of interest, we are certainly very aware that there are male survivors of domestic abuse. And I think, that we are ensuring and encouraging that all survivors of domestic abuse, regardless of gender, sex, age, can access safe accommodation and domestic abuse support. One of the reasons we looked into and have adopted dispersed safe accommodation is there are very few male refugees in the UK, full stop. And I think we introduced this to ensure that male survivors can also access safe accommodation. All our IDVAs will work with high-risk male survivors, and we take, for my housing IDVA team, they take referrals for male survivor victims, as well as women, families, anybody who is approaching as homeless or in a housing crisis due to domestic abuse. And in terms of the ongoing support, I think that's quite clearly, that is what's at the heart of the strategy. As you say, just leaving someone in a home isn't enough. And this is a bespoke approach where the support continues. We have the housing IDVAs supporting the survivors in the accommodation. We ensure that journey, that survivor receives support throughout it, so they are not just left on their own. And obviously, I think potentially for survivors, if they don't receive that support, there is a risk of further harm, reconciliation. And I think it is, accommodation itself doesn't solve domestic abuse, but accommodation with support, with bespoke support, with ensuring the knowledge and the training is out there in the community, and that all survivors feel comfortable that they can be referred to our service or contact their housing teams and receive domestic abuse support.
Hey, thank you very much. We've got Alex, followed by Claire, followed by Philippa.
Thank you, Chair. I was really pleased to see the focus on Eastern Europeans in the safe accommodation strategy for the next 3 years. But then, of course, my first question, looking at that paragraph, is it is important to have first language support, but there are so many different languages within this Eastern European group is really diverse. And my question is, are we focusing perhaps on the largest groups within this Eastern European community, such as Romanian, Polish, Lithuanian, in terms of the languages spoken, or are we having a different approach to that? Because I think resource-wise, it's impossible to cover all the different languages and groups and subgroups within this broad Central and Eastern European community. And the question linked to that is, are there any other organizations, especially migrant-led organizations, that we can work with in this space? I was thinking, for example, like the Eastern European Resource Center, some other national organizations that perhaps already have translated resources, so we don't duplicate the work, especially if it's such a large group to cover. So I was wondering or we already have any kind of partnerships with some charities or not-for-profit organizations who work directly or are led by some of those migrant groups. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. As you say, I think domestic abuse support in somebody's first language is, if it can be achieved, face-to-face, the best option that we can offer. We certainly are with our two AA IDVAs, as they are called in our service. Primarily, they are focused on the Lithuanian and Polish communities in this area, particularly in Finland, following a very sad DHR, which is a domestic abuse homicide. It was clearly seen that there was a need to try and access particularly the Lithuanian community in their first language. Our Lithuanian IDVA, she does speak two other languages as well, though Lithuanian is her first language. But certainly we do link up with domestic abuse services that offer domestic support in their first language. For example, there's Vesta, which is a Polish domestic abuse support organisation. In terms of those survivors who are not European, we look at linking them up with Southeast Asian support, for example, though we have Urdu and Pashto speakers within our team. And IDVAs are supported and constantly looking for that partnership working, to ensure that the survivors, and again, that's kind of where we're at with this strategy, particularly with the flexible funding, is looking to where we can source and resource options that suit that individual rather than a one-size-fits-all. And as I said to the previous councillor, we had paid for counselling in people's first language, for example, to ensure that happens. But yeah, we have close links with the other domestic abuse support services that are, as I would describe them, by and for services particularly.
Thank you very much. Claire and then Philippa.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the paper and the presentation. You mentioned partnership working. I'm sure that there are lots of different partners involved. I'm particularly interested in the partnership with the police. The refugees themselves, the physical safety of those, is that the responsibility of the county council or the police? And how does that work, keeping the building safe, keeping the places safe? I mean, the exterior of the places, so that when someone is there, they feel that they are protected.
I suppose I'm just thinking, all refugees in this area and the providers in Cambridgeshire are Refuge, the organisation, provides the refugees in Fenland and Mid Cambs, and Women's Aid, the national organisation, provides the refuge in Cambridge City. All refugees have a direct link to their local police station and police force. They have very, very clear health and safety rules, things to do in emergency. For example, if you visit either the Cambridge Refuge or the Central Refuge run by Refuge, double entry systems, security is paramount. Refuges house the most vulnerable and the most at-risk survivors that we meet. And we fund the refuges, So therefore, we help with their security, we help with the funding of that, but the local refugees have a very strong relationship with the police. You know, they are often the first port of call that when the police are looking for a safe place to place a survivor at the middle of the night, and they will respond to police and look for solutions for them. But certainly the security and safety of refugees, it is their responsibility, but we fund it, and safety is the first thing they think about. Safety and risk management is there from the moment a survivor walks into that setting.
Can I just ask another question about partnership working? So is there any spread of cost expenditure across the partnership, any sharing of costs across the partnership working?
So in terms of shared, not relating directly to this strategy, because with this strategy, the funding comes from DLUC, so it comes from central government. But we are funded by, we do joint working with the Police and Crime Commissioner, and we have done some joint working with health. So there are parts where funding does come together, but I can only comment specifically on the safe accommodation strategy. Lisa may be able to comment more on the kind of wider funding, but this is, I suppose, ours, as it were, you know. But sorry, I should have said, if you want me to come back with more detail about that response, I am very happy to do so. Sorry.
Thank you, Philippa.
Yes, I think like all councillors, we're thinking about the casework in our divisions, which is related to domestic violence. The first one I'm thinking of was actually a male victim who, I'm glad to say, got a council house. That was relatively straightforward and made a new life. More complicated was somebody coming back to her family from Liverpool, overcrowded house. They tried and tried, but couldn't find anywhere where she would get the family support within reach, and ended up going back, which was sad. And it's just part of the general housing provision in this area, which does raise my one question about the dispersed safe accommodation, and that is, what's the shortfall? Because 8 units isn't much, and this, what I don't know that she would have been eligible, but this is the general housing shortage feeds into this. And to be realistic, 8 is a tiny drop. So I'd be interested if you could estimate the shortfall, a little bit like Councillor Goodliffe's question about the number of children who haven't been accounted for. And the other one was somebody who did get over to a refuge, good support from the police. I had to quickly learn that just because if you knew somebody before they were as a victim, important not to try and contact them because that can be a breach of the refuge's rules the other end. So I'd quite like to know whether there was any money changing hands with it was a London refuge, for example, that she went into, whether we in any way helped to pay for that. And so that was it. It's just what's the shortfall of this dispersed safe accommodation, which would have been necessary for my first example. And is there money changing hands when it comes to our women, in this case, going to other refuges? Thank you.
So thank you for the question. So prior to joining the County Council, which was now, 2022, I was 24 years working at Cambridge City Council in various housing settings. So I'm really aware that there is a significant demand for social housing in this area. And there is also a significant dearth to a certain extent for social housing in this area. I can't comment specifically on how allocations policies are agreed. We certainly feed into and listen to the Housing Board, the Cambridgeshire Housing Board. The reason the dispersed accommodation is so small, and if you were wanting a shortfall between the numbers who are currently in local authority temporary accommodation in Cambridgeshire versus the number of dispersed accommodation units, I can say it's huge, it's great, it's massive. There is no doubt about that, but I can come back to you on the figures. So I think the dispersed accommodation units are simply a small attempt by ourselves as the County Council to try and offer a small difference. For example, since my time in this role, and I initiated the first properties and got them moving, we've now had 3 women with 5+ children who have come through our dispersed accommodation. We have had 2 clients who had no recourse to public funds, but were eligible to access public funds with support and did so, but couldn't access social housing or temporary accommodation for that reason, and we've supported them. We have had a male survivor who was considered for our accommodation, and we've also accommodated a family who, due to the mother's disabilities, needed something more than temporary accommodation. But it is a small part of the bigger overall picture, which, as you describe, is difficult. And that is part of the aim of the safe accommodation strategy, is to try and help those survivors going into temporary accommodation, for example, or local housing providers, to make that journey for survivors moving into temporary accommodation better, to reduce that risk of reconciliation, to reduce that risk of feeling that where they are living is worse than the abusive situation they have fled, which is, you know, it's a difficult thing to countenance, really. But I do like to think that the dispersed accommodation units we have made a difference to some people. And we do work closely with local housing teams to ensure they're aware that those families working with IDVAs can access that accommodation. In terms of funding of those dispersed accommodation units, there is an amount that comes out of the Safe Accommodation Strategy budget to pay for management fees and the cost of safe accommodation, but the rent itself is paid for by housing benefit. So it depends which area the dispersed accommodation sits, and it is then the housing benefit for that area that pays that rent, because it is seen as supported exempt accommodation.
Was it, unless I misunderstood, the when this resident of mine went to a London refuge, she's now back home, glad to say, and so far so good. We're all pleased to hear good story, good endings, aren't we? Was there money changing hands in that transaction, or when you talked about it being women's aid as a national, is that then dealt with by them as partners?
So Women's Aid are a national organisation that provides refuge spaces across the UK, and they receive funding from a variety of sources for each local refuge. And then they also claim, the survivors who live in that accommodation claim housing benefit to pay for the rent costs of that accommodation. So in terms of, there is money that is paid for refuges. There are a few refuges throughout the UK that are trying their utmost to offer accommodation to survivors with no recourse to public funds who cannot access housing benefit. And that is a really fantastic thing that they are doing. And they are doing that through local funding, so that these women who are particularly marginalised, and some men, you know, can still access refuge accommodation.
Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you very much for presentation and for answering so many points so thoroughly, and for all the fine work you're doing. It's really making a difference out there. So thank you for joining us today. And we're being asked, our recommendation here is to approve the strategy, which I think we're all happy to do, if I've read them correctly. Conscious we've been going for more than 2 hours, I'm just going to suggest we have a 5-minute break, and then we'll finish off the balance of the meeting, if that's acceptable to everyone. So I'll see you back here just before 20 past. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can we reconvene? And then we can deal with the rest of the business. Okay, we're back. I think Councillor Criswell had to leave. We but he did because he told me, so he's had to leave. So I think we're all Lucy's on her way back. Yeah. So if we go to item 9, which is a corporate performance report, Q3, over to you, Sue.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So you've got the performance report for October to December, and obviously the detail is set out in the appendix. So I just want to highlight that the movement in indicators is set out in paragraph 3.2, and we've seen some positive movement in indicators for the skills service, for the library service, and from the service that we've just heard from as well, the domestic violence advocacy service, well, certainly related to the work that we've just heard about. We've got 2 red indicators around the number of active library users, a slight decline, but that's we often see that at this time of year with the impact of Christmas. And we've also had St Neots closed for 6 weeks, and that's a very busy library. And likewise, the number of visits to a library site on a quarterly basis is showing that sort of seasonal impact. I just want to highlight the changes that are set out in paragraph 4, and in particular the changes that we're putting forward to you today in response to the feedback we received in this committee back in January. So we want to change the way we look at active library users. Previously, up until this point, we've been measuring it against pre-pandemic levels, and we want to change that to having it to increase by 2%. On an annual basis. That's right, for some reason I've just opened another tab. Just keep my fingers off my mouse, it's too sensitive. And then the other, to take the same approach with another indicator about visits to libraries on a quarterly basis, again, to rather than take it from the pre-pandemic figures, but to set a target of increasing by 2%. Just want to highlight as well, we want to remove the digital engagement indicator. That's a proposition put in front of committee today. That was specifically created during the pandemic because, of course, that was a way in which we could measure the effectiveness of the service in that particular circumstance. I particularly want to draw your attention to the new proposals under section 4, which is a new way of trying to bring to life this performance report, which ties back to our discussion in January, and a proposition here that we demonstrate how across the year how the library supports the council's ambitions, featuring a different ambition each quarter and then some specific indicators in relation to that indicator. So I'd be interested to hear your feedback on that as a proposition. And then just finally in section 4.6, we've got a proposal to remove an indicator around youth providers participating in the network to one around youth and community groups who we support through seed funding, because that's probably something we can sort of count more effectively, and then add in a further indicator about the impact of that funding. So some positive news, some changes proposed here to indicators, different ways of looking at library indicators in relation to the council's ambitions, and some slight changes in the indicators in relation to the youth and communities work. So, and the recommendations obviously to note and to approve all those changes that are set out in section 4. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Any questions on this? Ian?
Sorry. Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it's a very good report. It may be me, I don't know. But when I was looking at the indicators, if you look at indicator 37 and indicator 36, it shows a direction of improvement going up, but in the wording it says change in performance declining. So I would have thought the arrow should have been the other way around, but that's just my only comment that I've got.
Thank you. I'm just looking at that now. I think yes, It is a little confusing, isn't it? Because it has declined, but it says the direction for improvement is up. And I suppose that sounds like an obvious thing to say. Maybe the direction for improvement is always up. We'll take that away just in case there's a technical issue around that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. Anybody else? On this? No. Okay, so we're being asked to note and comment on the performance information and act as necessary, which we've done, and approve the proposed changes to the key indicators as set out in section 4 of this report. Are we happy to do that? I think we are. Okay, that's carried. And again, finance monitoring report, January 2024, for yourself again, Sue.
Thank you. Yes. Our finance colleagues on annual leave. So any detailed questions I will take back to Claire. But obviously we're asked to review and comment on this report, and you see in front of you the budgets that are relevant for this committee from regulatory services and communities, libraries and skills. The report takes us to the end of January 2024, and in terms of our revenue spend, we have an underspend as at the end of January of 30k across all of those services. Obviously, there's more detail set out in the report, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody wish to raise any questions at all? Henry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So looking at the table in 3.2, am I reading that right, that we've underspent by about 1.6 million? Is that right? Three 3.2 of the report, so page 106.
I think that relates to capital funding, and then you've got a more detailed table beneath that in relation to some of the capital schemes. Yeah, 1.3. Yes. At the moment, that is the. So I think there's been some delays on some of the capital funding projects in library services, and this probably indicates that delay, but that we're still intending to carry out all these works across all these libraries. But obviously, as we look at this within the financial year, so it's an underspend as anticipated within this financial year, but the capital funding will be retained and carried over so that this work can continue. I think I've got that right. Yeah, thank you.
I think Lucy just wants to comment here, and then I'll come to you yourself, Claire.
Yeah, looking at the table underneath, it also looks as if one of the things that's happened is that some of the funding has moved from one part of the council to another, and therefore it may even not be that the capital fund, that the spend has moved to a different year, but also just that the funding's coming from a different place.
Yeah, so the table underneath refers to, so you may recall that previously we had an allocation, a capital allocation for some libraries improvements of 500,000, and also against the open access library scheme, we had a further allocation of 800,000, that's the 0.819. And those two figures have been sustained through the business planning process, but are being funded through the Just Transition Fund as an alternative to using capital fund for that investment, because obviously one of the things that was discussed through business planning was the pressure on capital, and so yes, the funding source for that has changed, whereas the table above is about some specific works in particular libraries that is over and above the what was the open access scheme in the previous 500. So that's the table above still does refer to capital investment, but yes, you're right, the 1.32 million in the table underneath is now the commitment through business planning, but has been transferred to Just Transition funding rather than capital to ease the capital pressure. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I think you wanted to raise a point.
Questions, one of which Lucy's just dealt with. But on the table in 3.2, there's a mention of the Every Space Library Improvement Fund, and that's not a specific capital programme, it's general across libraries, and there's an underspend there as well. Is that for the same reason that some of the projects are running behind?
So my understanding of the Every Space Fund is that it's a Department for Culture and Media and Sport Capital Award that we've received for March Library and for the City Centre Library. And so, but obviously because it goes through our books, it is registered here as a capital scheme, but it's externally funded. And yes, the work is yet to complete, I think in the Central Library, if I recall it, but that's what the Every Space project is. Thank you.
Anybody else? Sorry, Jeff.
Beg your pardon, sorry. Just the interpretation of the table, the finance table on, I'm just looking at the reference, but it's the main table. Page 105 anyway. Well, I understand the top line, places and sustainability. Then we look at the next group, strategy and partnerships, community, libraries and skills. Yep, we're going to spend 100, if you take the top line, 160. Then we're going to receive an income of 106,000. Difference 54. And then the next figure is the actual, I think, you headed it up, actual, minus 8091. I presume that's 809, minus 8 million. Outturn variance, 0. Forecast variance, 0. I don't understand how that works. And
so I'll make an attempt, but please don't quote me on this. And I think we'll take this question away. But my understanding is that, yes, it could well be, just let me look at the top of that table. I think we'll be best to take that away, actually, to determine if the figure you've got in the column where it says the 8 million, whether that too refers to income. But I think we'll take that question away and get some clarification from finance colleagues.
Yeah, it's all of the figures in that.
Yeah, all of the figures in that column that read down the sort of the 1, 2, 3, 4th column along. Yes,
Yeah,
and then clarification.
And then the variance itself and the forecast doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah,
but.
yeah. So we'll ask for an explanation and do a note back for you on that one. Thank you. And it's partly, it'll be to do with what sits under each of those headline categories, the detail that sits beneath that, and where the finance comes from that sits underneath that. But I think we do need finance colleagues to answer that for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's nothing else, we've reviewed and commented on that report, and you'll be delighted to know we've now reached the final item on the agenda, which is the agenda plan and appointments. For noting, I think, really, but anybody have any comments, Philippa?
Oh, you'll have to make suggestions what could go on the agenda plan. I think I'm the only one here who was at corporate parenting yesterday, but this is an issue that's hopped over as well with knowledge of certainly Councillor Boulat, and that is wanting to have some across the directorates action to do with helping foster parents have large enough accommodation to take on young people. Not an easy thing. It would need partnerships with district councils. I know that every officer you talk to thinks it's, we need to do something if we can, but I'm not sure where it will land in the way of an agenda plan. So I'm just putting in a bid to put it here to just, if possible, do that. But I think Ranjit will be able to fill you in, and it needs to go somewhere, and it is one that would be partnerships, and I'm not sure whether it fits here or not, Councillor Sanderson.
Fit here, but we'll find out. Might be one of the other committees, but we'll find out for you.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Anybody else? Jeff?
Yeah, I don't know whether it should be on here or should not be, but can we have fairly regular updates on how our priorities fund projects are doing? Not necessarily in the financial sense, have they spent the money, but are they, completed? And that may take some time. I don't know what the program was there, but they have been completed and they are successful. It would be nice to hear.
Okay, yes. So our next meeting, unless we need to use the reserve meeting, is 11th of July. So that might be a good time to get some feedback.
Is it?
I'm advised that might be a bit too soon.
No,
I
Well,
think
that's
because
a
they're
good point.
capital
Yeah.
projects, we'll
that's-
get a sense of from Jill of the nature of the projects, and therefore what would be a good time to bring an update back to you. But I suspect it might take a little bit longer than the next
I
meeting.
agree. Yeah.
So there's nothing else. Ros, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, could I, in terms of updates of the capital projects, is there an ongoing mechanism that doesn't, to keep track of the money from this, if it doesn't all get spent or whatever? What is the mechanism that survives various members of staff leaving the council?
Thank you. Yes, I think as we do track and monitor it, we can keep a running tab, if you like, of whether if an application kind of doesn't succeed, then we'll be able to report on that as much as we can report on those that are succeeding and meeting their milestones. If that's what you mean in terms of the finance that may fall back in.
Yes, and I guess also, are there timeframes on when the money has to be spent?
Yes, and we'll look at that with the projects, and that's the work that Jill will pick up following today's meeting to actually go through that detail of the milestones project by project. But yes.
Thank you very much. No other questions. Appreciate all your time this afternoon and have a safe journey home. See you again soon. Thank you.